nervous because this is a topic that is close to my heart. And it's a topic that people feel very passionately about one way or the other. And my heart's beating so fast right now. I've been thinking all week about how I'm going to approach this topic, but today I'm going to talk about why representation matters. In the first place, I'm going to start close to home. I write fantasy and sci-fi for the most part, and I've always been in love with fantasy, all sorts of fantasy worlds ever since I was a kid. I think most kids are. And I loved princesses and elves and fairies, and none of them looked like me. So when I started writing my own characters in fantasy worlds, they were all white because I thought that's what they were supposed to look like. I thought black people didn't belong in fantasy, dark-skinned people didn't belong in fantasy. The closest to dark skin I ever saw were like dark elves or drows, and they had like black, gray, or purple skin, so not like brown skin, and they were always evil. So I laugh, but it's a topic that's very distressing for me. I sometimes hear people say representation doesn't matter because they saw themselves in characters that didn't look like them, or, they didn't represent them. And then, that's good for you. I have heard people who were not black say that they identified with Black Panther, so that should not be an issue, right? But yeah, that's a good thing. That's a really, really good thing. But I am going to counter with this. When Black Panther first came out, when it was first coming out, I was so excited, and I wrote on Facebook, like, oh my gosh, like, question from my white friends, is this how you guys feel? Is this what it feels like? And then one of my white friends said, no, because it's what we're used to. You don't even think about it. You see yourself represented all the time. It's not something that you think about. And that's not just true for race, that's true for any kind of representation. So I'm going to start off by saying, I'm straight. I'm straight and I'm cisgendered. So when I watch TV, I see people who represent that all the time. It's not something I ever really thought about until I got older. A hefty chunk of my friends are LGBT, and they helped me realize that wow, there's not a lot of like good, accurate LGBT representation of like couples or just characters in general. And I never noticed that because I'm straight and I'm cis, and that's what I see on TV all the time. It's not something I ever really thought about. So that's what it's like when you're black and you see something like Black Panther come out. And you see, like, there's Wakanda, and there's Shuri, who's a princess, but she's also an intellectual badass, and she's like a badass engineer. And then you have Okoye, and just to see all of that on screen. And then you have Nakia, who was the love interest, and she was dark-skinned, like she's darker than me, and she's beautiful, and that's not really something you ever see. Crossing into the territory of colorism, even when you do see like a black woman as a love interest, she's typically light-skinned, lighter than me, and that goes back a long, long time. There's a long history of that, and the fact that a love interest in a big movie was dark-skinned is a huge deal, because a lot of people tend to think that dark skin is ugly, dirty, unattractive, and we don't get much representation in the media. Like, I'm not that dark-skinned, but you hardly even see, love interests anywhere near my skin color, And that meant a lot. It means a lot. And I was so happy when Black Panther came out. Sometimes in writer groups, either on Facebook or on Twitter, someone asks, why do you write? Why do you write the things that you write? And I sometimes take this opportunity to say, I write because I want, Black girls and Black women to see themselves in fantasy and sci-fi tales, because that's not really something I got when I was younger. Or, and when I say younger, I don't just mean as a child, I mean in college too. And then there's always someone who hops in my inbox or comments and they say something like, well, I'm afraid to write Black characters because I grew up around all white people and I don't want to get backlash, or they say something like that. And I think, well, we're humans. If you're writing fantasy especially, you don't really have to worry about things like the social issues and the institutional racism and the ideology that comes with that in the real world. If you're writing fantasy, you don't really have to worry about that. If you can write dragons and wizards and things like that, then you can write a character with dark skin who just happens to be dark skinned. It doesn't really have to be it doesn't have to be like a huge deal to have to write a character who looks like that. If you are writing science fiction and it takes place in the future, it does take a little bit more mindfulness when you're writing people of color or any other marginalized group that you're not familiar with. It will take research, and it will be smart to maybe enlist a sensitivity reader. But it's definitely doable. I have done it. I've written characters, who are in marginalized groups. And not because, I thought I need to write more marginalized groups, because I wanted to, and that's how they appeared in my mind, and that's how I wrote them down. I realized that that's not how everyone is going to envision their characters, which is fine. We all envision our characters in different ways. Especially when it comes to elves though, this is where my love-hate relationship with Tolkien comes into play. Because Tolkien's elves are fair-skinned with long straight hair. If I remember correctly, I think they were maybe darker skinned than, not skinned, they had darker hair in the books than, Legolas in the movies. But either way, they were very pale with super long hair. And Lord of the Rings was written a very long time ago, decades ago, and even now that's what people think about when they think elves, because Tolkien was so influential. And that's why I have a love-hate relationship, because I adore the world that he created, but it's time to move on in some ways. We don't all have to write fantasy that takes place in a place like Middle Earth or a place like medieval Europe, and all the elves and all the princesses and all the fairies. They don't have to be super pale milk translucent. And this is another thing that affected me when I was younger. When I drew elves, that's what they looked like. And I watched Bright on Netflix. Well, more or less. My boyfriend watched it and I just kind of caught glimpses of it, and all the elves still looked like that. They were still pale with the long straight hair, and I think it's time to mix it up. So I saw a photo, someone posted a photo somewhere of this model who has become one of my favorites, and I'll post a picture here or here somewhere. I'll post a picture so you can see how beautiful she is, and I will provide links in the description. She's so gorgeous, and the first pictures I saw of her, she was an elf, like a fantasy elf with wolf dogs and posing in a beautiful meadow, and I was like, yes, And all of her photos are like that. She is some beautiful fantasy creature, and she's dark-skinned and lovely. She's dark and lovely. And I thought that's what we need. More beautiful fantasy characters who are dark and lovely. Like, I am 26 and I felt like a small child seeing that. I thought, oh my gosh, finally, yes, an elf that looks like me, who's not evil, like a dark-skinned elf who's beautiful. It's a small victory, but it's a meaningful one to me. A small victory in a world of erasure. And when I say erasure, I mean it's not always, malicious intent. It's just, we don't exist. Black women especially. We tend not to exist in fantasy worlds. People just don't think to include us. And I just find that really interesting and also heartbreaking. When you do see a black person in fantasy, he's a guy and it's only one of him, the token black guy. And it doesn't matter what genre you're writing. It doesn't matter if you're writing fantasy or anything else. If you only include one black guy, he is a token. I don't care if he's the main character's best friend and he has like a huge role. If he's the only one, he's a token. And I think I'm gonna make another video about tokenism specifically. So I'll save that rant for later. But yeah, so I think it might be interesting to see like more diverse characters in fantasy worlds. I think it would be pretty cool because in fantasy you can do anything, right? You can have dragons in space. You can create entire worlds from the ground up. So it is ultimately up to you. So considering that the possibilities are endless, why not? Why does everyone look the same in so many fantasy stories? And going back to the topic of erasure, I went on a tangent. This applies to video games too, because I play video games, and there's a time in my life when I played League of Legends for hours, so many hours. And I started to realize more and more characters were being created. None of them looked like me. None of them were black. Especially none of them were black women. But the characters were white and Asian. And I thought, well, wait a minute. So I would bring this topic up sometimes, and this is when I really found out that the League community is really toxic. They would give me a lot of really racist responses. Like when I would say, why are there, I wish there were more black characters. And they would say, oh, well, there's Wukong, there's Nocturne, and I thought maybe Nidalee might be, at least mixed, but then they redid her art and now she's pale. She just looks like a white character. And I got sick of it. I realized I've been talking about fantasy a lot because that's kind of my thing, but representation matters outside of fantasy and science fiction as well. So a lot of people have been talking about Friends recently because of the whole Netflix thing. And truth be told, I don't really understand the whole hype around Friends. And I was watching a video about someone talking about representation, and they happened to mention Friends and Living Single. So I grew up watching Living Single, all black cast, and if there were no Living Single, there would be no Friends. Living Single was the blueprint for Friends. Except Friends is kind of like a sitcom, kind of like a mindless sitcom that you can watch and laugh at. Living Single was funny, but it actually dealt with, social issues and things like racism and sexism and things like that. And it was empowering, especially for Black women, to see women like Sinclair, Khadijah, Max, and all the wonderful things that they did, and how funny and witty they were. And someone in the comments of this video said, well, if you're okay with Living Single's all Black cast, but you're not okay with Friends all white cast, you're a hypocrite. And I meditated on that for a while, and I thought, it's kind of not the same, because you see like shows like Friends, and you see characters all the time like Friends in everything, but you don't see Black sitcoms like Living Single, especially not anymore, unfortunately. So whereas Friends does not add anything to representation, Living Single did. And I'm really sad that there are not shows like that. There are not Black shows like that on TV anymore, because that's what I grew up with, and it was wonderful. And I think a lot of people, especially a lot of young Black women, a lot of young Black people in general, would really benefit from seeing representations of themselves like that on TV. For similar reasons, Crazy Rich Asians is so important. The fact that its popularity just kind of exploded is a huge deal. Think of a huge Hollywood movie that was an all-Asian cast, that was a big hit, that wasn't historical, and that wasn't a martial arts movie. And I read the book first before I watched the movie, and I just finished the second book, and I'm about to read the third book. But I am really happy about Crazy Rich Asians and what it has accomplished. And I really think there needs to be more like that. So there's progress in that front, and I just would like to see more of it. I had something else I wanted to say and I forgot. I've been sitting here for like 5 minutes trying to remember what I was gonna say. But I guess I'll just move on. So yes, representation matters. And even outside of fantasy, whenever you do see Black women characters, especially if they're dark-skinned, they're usually loud, ghetto, ignorant, and that simultaneously hurts my feelings and cracks me up. Because most of my Black girlfriends are nothing like that. In fact, I'm pretty sure none of them are like that. And that's like a very specific kind of person, and you're trying, whoever is behind these shows, they're trying to represent us, all of us, as being that way, when really we can be nerdy, we can be soft, and, you know, soft-spoken, but also intelligent. There's also the stereotype of being strong, and I think that has hurt us more than it has helped us, because stories tend to treat us as the strong character, almost inhuman. And I think that translates to how people tend to treat us in real life, subconsciously, as if we cannot be hurt, or that we're too strong to be hurt. And I mean, we're not all like that, and we are all definitely human, and we can all definitely be hurt. And I just would like to see, you know, a wider variety of Black women characters who are dainty, who are cute, who are strong, who are intelligent, who are soft, you know, some who are badass. Like, we are not all, you know, one type. There are many, many kinds of us. Like, it boggles my mind that there are still people out there who don't think that nerdy Black girls exist. as far as I'm concerned, I exist, and so do many of my friends. So yeah, I mean, I focused a lot on Black women in this video, but this applies to all marginalized groups. This applies to people of color in general. This applies to the LGBT community. This applies to characters with disabilities. And I'm not saying you have to have a checklist when you're writing and write all this hodgepodge of diverse characters. But it does give you something to think about. If you refuse to write a certain character, maybe stop and ask yourself why. You might learn something about yourself and it might end up helping you. And I think having these sort of discussions with yourself can help, progress your writing or whatever it is that you're doing. It might help you understand our feelings a bit more when marginalized groups say, hey, we would like more representation. And it will probably help you understand why we get so excited when we do get that sort of representation. I will always remember, like, whenever there's a new superhero movie that comes out and there's a little kid who's like, that's me! I read these articles and things like that, and these Facebook posts of these children. The Spider-Verse just came out, Into the Spider-Verse, and a mother posted about her boy who is Black, and he was never really interested in Spider-Man until he saw Miles Morales. He saw that Spider-Man could look like him. He could have kinky hair, he could have brown skin, and that spoke to him. And when Deadpool 2 came out, there was a video like going around, not a video, but there was a picture that was going around Facebook, and I tried so hard to find it for this video, but it was this little mixed girl with an afro, and she saw Domino, and she was like, that's me. Her mom was saying she didn't have the heart to tell her daughter that that wasn't her, and I thought that was so cute. Representation is so important. It's so important. And I try to be optimistic. I think there is a growing number of maybe writers like me, writers who, include a more diverse cast, I guess I could say. And it's something that I look forward to seeing more in movies and video games, in addition to books. So, yeah, it matters. I guess I'll end the video here.